So in general, I mean, before we deep dive into scenario analysis, right, it's important to understand what is the purpose, why is being asked, why this is being asked for, why we do this. So, so FSB and NGFS, which are the central bodies in UK and the body of all the central banks globally, NGFS. So they have done some surveys with majority of the banks and other stakeholders to assess why they are doing this, because all those people have been doing this for long, and this is the output. So you would know that what is the main purpose and motive behind for the people doing this, and everybody has their own reason. But fundamentally, one of the most important reason is whether the companies will be able to survive in that near future. So to assess the climate risk could have the financial impact on the financial stability, and to develop the capabilities to handle the unknowns of the unknown in the future, and how the climate risk could affect the individual bodies. So it impacts the government, it impacts the financial institutions, it impacts the individuals. So this tool helps us to develop that how the future will look like, and in that future, would I have the capability to survive, and what are the resources I would need in the future, and whether I have the would need in this. So everybody plans their future, and everybody have those financial planning in the normal context, right? So this is more of a the climate planning. Next slide. So what is scenario analysis, right? So in common sense, it is just a tool to enhance your critical thinking, where you paint the picture of the future, and you tell that this is how the apart from the business as usual, right? I'll get you a very crude example. So every year at the beginning of the year, we have a new year resolutions, right? And in that, there are people who just have one line agenda, that these are the 4 points I will have. And then they will have, okay, this is the business as usual, bare minimum. I am going to visit 2 cities, I'm going to reduce weight and all those stuff. But they will have another scenario. If I get a double of the hike in my current organization, I might visit 4 cities, buy a house, and do other thing. If I get a job change, I might do X. So what at the beginning of the year people is doing, they are building various scenarios, right? So they are building the picture apart from the business as usual scenario, which is not which is dependent on the various parameters. So in the climate context, this is what the firms will be doing, that they will be challenging the existing conviction, and based and deviating from your business as usual scenarios assumptions, they are going to build the cases that how the future is going to look like. But the point is that when are you going to build those cases? For example, today, the temperature from the base pre-industrial era is at 1.1 degree. So you will build 5 scenarios, that one is at 1.6, one is at 2, 6, 8, and so on and so forth. Right. So this is how a practical scenario will look like. That what will happen if the temperature becomes 6 degree? What happens if temperature becomes 3 degree? What happens if the temperature goes to zero as well? So best case and the worst case scenarios, right? But there are conditions and characters for which the scenarios needs to be made. I mean that first of all, they should be possible, which means that they should be believable. They should be realistic. You can't have a target sitting here that okay, I want to be the CEO of the company next year. Now, if you have joined a company as a management trainee, your scenarios can't be that you can be a CEO of the company in next 3 4 years. That's not believable and possible, right? In that reference, worst you can have that I can have promotion every year, but you can't go to directly to the CEO in the next 3 years in the particular organization. It's not that it's not possible, but it's not believable. It's one in a thousand scenarios. It's distinctive. So if you are building scenarios, which means that if you are building 3 scenarios, all the three scenarios should not be similar sounding. For example, if you are building scenarios of your how much wealth you are going to put this year, so you can't have if I get a 3% hike, if I get a 4% hike, if I get a 4.5% hike, right? So all these scenarios which I have told about, that just 0.5% difference of the hikes, and see how much of the travel and what kind of financial planning you're going to do, is not distinctive. You need to have a distinctive scenario which are very different in path. And then the assumptions which you need to take in all those, and the goal needs to be consistent. In one scenario, you can't say that, okay, the population of the earth is going to grow at 1 degree in 1%, and then you, in the second scenario, you can't say that there would be a degrowth in the global uh, human beings. And the second last is, it should be relevant in the global context. And finally, it should be challenging enough. So by the challenging enough, which means that when you are taking four scenarios, the two end of the scenarios, I mean the base scenarios and the reference scenarios apart from that, should be challenging enough and should be hard enough. For example, if you're taking a temperature of 1.1, your maximum should go to up to 8. It can't, I mean, scientifically beyond 8 is not feasible right now. So you should take a best case scenario and a worst case scenario. So if you take both the cases, in the best case scenario, what will happen that your transition risk will be very high and the physical risk will be very low. In your worst case scenario, your transition risk will be low, but your physical risk will be very high. So these scenarios which are there, the characteristics of that, this is a very, very important exam question point. You will get multiple MCQs that they will give you some scenarios and they will say whether this scenario is fine. They would not qualify because they might not be possible, they might not be distinctive, they might not be consistent, they might not be relevant, or they might not be challenging enough. So you need to understand this 6 points very clearly. And if you think that any of the scenario is failing into this criteria and conditions, which means it's not a relevant scenario. It's a definite point which comes in the exam. And apart from that, while building into the scenarios as well, this is critically important. Next slide. So as we know that based on our past, we are building the future. This slide just give you in a brief pictorial representation of what we have spoken. Your scenarios in long term could be 3, 4. Ideally, you should have minimum 3 and maximum 4 scenarios to see how it goes. And it should be breaked into a short term and long term. For example, we built about how the world will look like in 2050. It's good to have a 2050 scenario, but it's good to have 2030 scenario as well, because it's easy to forecast next 9 years rather than 8 years, rather than forecasting next 25 years. So your scenarios that should be breaked into a short term and long term. At the same point of time, you should have multiple scenarios, and all those 4 multiple scenarios which we are there, they should have, all of them should have the characteristics which we have spoken about, that they should be possible, distinctive, challenging, relevant, and other things. And obviously, those scenarios which are there, they should be taken from the global reference scenarios of IPCC and IEAs, which we'll speak into the next slides. I'll pause here to take any question. No questions?
Hi, just one thing. In the previous slides, I believe you mentioned about 6 characteristics, like plausible and many other factors, right? So, yeah, the plausible, distinctive, consistent, relevant, challenging, right? So, is it like for the long term, medium, and the present scenario? I mean, can you go to the next slide? Yeah, short term, medium, long term. Is it required for all those characteristics, like each short term, medium, long term,
Yes.
for
Yes.
plausible than the other?
Yes.
So around
Yes.
6, each will have short term, medium, long term, right?
I mean, see, the scenario will only be one. Just that your milestone will be breaked into short, medium, and long. It's not that you will have,
Oh,
let's say, 4 scenarios. You will
okay.
not have that breaked into this. So you will have one scenario, right, in which I'll stick to the example of hikes, right? So you want to become a CEO, right? So in short term, what you will have that I want to become yeah, a manager, then GM, and then CFO, and then CEO, right? This is your path. So you break your goals into short term, medium term, and long term. But it's not that each of the scenarios will have a different short term, medium term, and long term. So there'll be only 3 to 4.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Yep. Next slide. So, what is the reference point of doing this? Why are we? I mean, from where is the scenario analysis requirement coming for the financial firms? Anybody? I mean, regulatory perspective, right? So, if a company is being asked to do scenario analysis, from where this is coming from?
In the TCFD, where we depict about the metrics and targets, there we have to show this scenario analysis as well the climate stress testing.
In metrics and targets?
Yeah, in one of the sections, I possibly think that the metrics and targets, where we have to show both these climate scenario as well as these climate stress testing. We have to
Yep.
describe about.
Okay. Okay. So, your good name?
Rohit.
Hi. So Rohit, you are partly correct. So the requirement is coming from TCFD. I'm sure that this audience would know TCFD. TCFD in many of the countries has been mandatorily adopted. So that's a regulation in the sense of reporting now, and many of the companies are adopting by their own. But sooner or later, it's much more of a mandatory play. So this is coming from the This is coming from the second pillar, which is called strategy. So in this strategy, you need to have the actual and the potential impact of the climate related risks and opportunities, which impacts the business, strategy, financial planning, and other information where material. So this statement where you need to understand what is the actual and the potential impact of the climate risk on the business, on the strategy, on the financial planning. How are you going to do this? Actual and potential in the future on the businesses. You are only going to do this by building a various reference scenarios and tell that in this scenario, my business strategy is going to be this. In this scenario, my business strategy is going to be this. Right? For example, in future, when we see that the petrol car goes away and the electric vehicles comes, for a Maruti, their reference scenarios is that they are just selling EVs. They are just selling petrol cars. They will have future reference scenarios in future that if the government comes with a policy that we'll only sell hybrids, 50% hybrid, 50% petrol cars. So they might have one scenario like this. Second scenario will only they will selling these EVs. So how the business strategy is going to change, what they are going to do with their engine and the platforms or their technologies and the R&D spend which they have done, how they are going to build the new capex and all of those. So in under the strategy pillar, this the reference of the scenario analysis requirement comes. There is a very informative things which is given by the TCFD under the strategy section about what kind of scenarios do TCFD expect. So here for future reference, and if you want to get more into this, just type TCFD reference document, and in that reference document, go to the strategy section, read about the scenarios a bit. Somebody has a hand raised.
Hi,
Hi.
just to get a clarity, for an example, let's just take the CEO example you mentioned before, right? With that one scenario, we will come up with governance standpoint, like an aspect of it, scenario, how it would look like for governance. then strategy how it will look like, risk how it will look like, then
No,
metrics.
that is no,
Okay.
no, that is different. So
Okay.
what here I'm telling that in that scenario of me becoming the CEO, right? So that is
Yeah.
if your career today is at a management trainee, right? And you want to have a 10-year scenario. So in that 10-year scenario, your business as usual scenario is be that or in organization, I get promotion every 6 years. So in next 10 years, I'll just get one promotion. So that's your base reference scenario, the base reference case, right?
Okay.
So you don't need to build a scenario on that because it's a normal path you will follow, right? And
Okay.
then you will build.
It would be great if you can give an example on, one climate related case, and then probably if you can
Okay.
guide. Yeah, that would be great. Thank you.
So for example, let's stick to this. For example, if we have 1.1 degree scenario as on now, right? So you don't need to build a scenario of 1.1 degree. You need to build a scenario at 2 degree, 4 degree, 6 degree, and 8 degree. 4 scenarios. Yeah. So 2, 4, 6, 8, these are the 4 scenarios. And these scenarios will come under the strategy criteria. And in that, under all these 4 scenarios, you need to see what is the impact at 2 degree, 4 degree, 6 degree, and 8 degree on your business strategy, on your financial planning, and on your capability to withstand in all of those cases. These are the different aspects of overall how do you govern the climate risk, and matrices is all about just disclosing scope 1, 2, and 3. Did I answer your question?
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Next slide.